Hello, everybody. I'm Roseanne Kenny, Regis Professor of Medical Gerontology at Trinity College, Dublin. I'm speaking to you from my second home, which is St. James's Hospital in Dublin, Mercer's Institute for Successful Aging. But pertinent to today, I am currently president of the Irish Gerontological Society, and I'm really delighted to welcome all of you to this public lecture, which will be delivered by a person who is without doubt a pioneer in this field, and particularly in the area that he will speak to, which is age-proofing our homes and our communities. That is Professor Rod Bond, architect, who graduated from Oxford University, Brookes University. I won't say the year. He was director of the Netwell Casala project in Louth and head of the Dundalk Institute of Technology's School Health and Science. They led on this whole Netwell project with respect to housing and developments for aging, and no doubt he'll address some of that. But they reorientated it to our researchers in the field towards the importance of housing for future proofing, and also the importance of incorporating knowledge with respect to perceptions, environment, senses, and development of new concepts of housing for aging. Rod himself, his core interest is in understanding the interrelationship between environmental structures and people's health and well-being, including neurological health and well-being. He's very much involved and, in fact, took a national lead on the WHO age-friendly cities movement from its very inception, and is committed to improving people's quality of life through place-making, service improvement, and social innovation. He supported the European Commission and its partners in the development of the first action plan for innovations in age-friendly buildings, age-friendly cities and environments, and took an active role within the European Innovation Partnership on Active and Healthy Aging. Since 2019, he's been working independently across architectural research, policy, and practice, with a focus in particular on inclusivity and intergenerational solidarity. Now, to complement Rod's talk, we will have a response from notable individuals involved in different aspects of this whole area on our panel. First of all, Professor Fiona Newell, who's Professor of Experimental Psychology and Professor of the Department of Psychology and the Trinity Institute for Neurosciences. And Fiona is a world leader in the area of behavioral processes, and I'll introduce her in more detail later on. Ms. Ija O'Shaughnessy, who is a research fellow at University College Cork, and now based at the University of Limerick, where she's doing her research examining the impact of geriatric assessment models on patient pathways. Mr. Michael Gowan, who is the Sustainability and Urban Design Manager in the Land Development Agency, and Mr. Tom Sheridan, who's Head of Development for Tetrarch Homes, experience in building age-friendly homes in the private sector in Ireland. So as you can see, a very skilled, cross-disciplinary panel who will make notes during Rod's lecture of issues that they feel are pertinent to their skill sets and respond to them during the panel response. And I'll introduce the panel in more detail later on. Now, for you to ask questions, you, the audience, there is underneath your video a prompt which asks for your name and then the question. So have a look at that and put your question into that, and that will arrive to me so that I can address it to Rod or one of the panel members if you feel that is more appropriate. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Rod Bond, and thank you very much for your contribution this afternoon, Rod.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much, Roseanne, for that lovely introduction. And I really thank you all for taking the time to come together today for this lecture and panel discussion on how we might improve our experiences of dwelling in Ireland as we age. I find it hard to believe that it's now 17 years since I first came into contact with the Irish Gerontological Society, when your then president, Killian Toomey, invited me to give an overview of the Nestling Project, a demonstration housing project for older people that we had just received funding for. We had drawn together Louth County Council, the HSE, DKIT, DCU, and Ulster University to implement what was then seen as a smart housing innovation, and we'd been very lucky to attract the support of the Atlantic Philanthropies. At that first IGS event, we'd just come back from a study visit to Europe, and in those early days, I could show only the possibilities and the achievements of others. But today, I look forward to going through some of our local achievements with you that we have had since then. When it comes to planning and design, the activity field we operate in tends to get characterized by 4 zones of action. Our groundings, a view of where we are currently and what we could improve, our visions of what we'd like to achieve and what improvements might look like, available mechanisms, tools, and practices we have available to draw on, and finally, agency, our means of pulling resources together to make change happen. A motivational access connects our groundings and vision. It's about getting to our ends. And an operational access connects our mechanisms with agency and delivery. It's about means. So these will form the backbone of my discussion today before finishing up on some prospects and priorities going forward. However, in the area of housing, aging, place, and community, I think we're in a very complex, thick, and contested social and cultural environment where we need moorings and navigation. So I'd like to expose 3 constituents of our milieu that, for me, still seem to be unstable. Annalise Bleachmore is a very talented 18-year-old art student in Urunga, Australia, and she created this triptych drawing for the equivalent of her Leaving Certificate exam. This is her statement that accompanies the slides. Through her 65 years of marriage, my grandparents had always shared a profound connection with the emulation of the phrase, "till death do us part." This work explores the ways this connection was affected as my granny developed dementia that gradually took hold of her mind, whilst my granddad's physical state rapidly declined due to multiple myeloma affecting his overall vitality, and it contributed to his passing in 2019. As a couple, they became progressively estranged, whilst their sentiment for each other never wavered. The dementia caused Grandad's passing to be incomprehensible to Granny, wandering the halls of the nursing home in search of her beloved husband. This work displays a representation of themselves before and after disease stole their lives, with only 5 years between the central couple portrait and the aged individuals on either side. Till Death Do Us Part asks us to consider the ways relationships are affected by circumstances beyond the couple's control, and how the relationship's essence is maintained in the hearts of each person after loss. Along with the very powerful intergenerational grandparent-grandchild bond, which is invisible unless this drawing and the statement are seen together, what we do see here are 4 figures, 2 bodies changing over time, and 1 couple's relationship maintained and strained over 5 years. We can look at models of age-friendly housing with supports for longer, healthier lives, but to what extent do we need to stress test them when we face more difficult age-related decline and end-of-life situations? Where do we set the boundaries on our places? A second constituent is related to the polarities of place, that of inclusivity and belonging. This drawing by Christine Wong Yap is a homage to the work of the great human geographer Wei Fu Tuan's 1977 book, Space and Place. In it, we see human yearning for both the shelter and safety of place and the venture and freedom of space. It reads, "A healthy being welcomes constraints and freedom, the boundedness of place and the exposure of space." And this sets up some place polarities of movement and rest, of insideness and outsideness, of belonging to and being separated from, of the ordinary and the extraordinary, of the within and the without, and of our way and the ways of others. When considering dwelling at home, we often think of aging in place as a singular situation in one's current location and time. The work of the South Korean artist Do Ho Soo focuses on a more nomadic view of home and suggests that home is what we carry with us. And I think this is a powerful way of bringing roofs, rootedness, and life journeys together, helping us to understand aging and the places we've been, are, and maybe wish for. The photo on the left is of São Paulo in Brazil and shows a favela being walled off from an affluent neighborhood. Along with demographic change, urbanization, globalization, and climate change are all challenging for attention and how to shape the evolution of our cities and communities. But we have a tendency to put up too many walls, boundaries, and silos, physical and social, around our rooms, homes, and neighborhoods in the interests of ownership, control, protection, and often identity. However, along with fractured places, we can also have fractured and vanishing communities and intense isolation. The photo on the right is of a Kodokushi, a specialist team cleaning up many months after a lonely death. There are nearly 30,000 lonely deaths in Japanese cities every year, and we may be at a different place here in Ireland, but we are not immune to the risks of loneliness and isolation. Combating isolation is a two-way engagement, drawing on family, friendships, and social networks in later life. And we do need to be honest with ourselves about our community commitment to being there for others, or if we see community as being something we can outsource or virtualize. So to the first of our action zones in awareness of our groundings and where we are today, I'd like to start by looking at how we're beginning to link place with well-being in Ireland, how we might use this to help us examine homes, communities, and capabilities, age-proofing at a range of levels, and some gaps, directions, and opportunities. Based upon work and guidelines from the OECD, over the past few years, the Irish government have been developing a well-being framework with a view to better understanding life in Ireland. It's the beginnings of a refreshing information resource that can provide a stronger social and environmental counterpoint to our more generally reported economic indicators. The 11 themes grouped are into three primary domains: place, people, and society. The place domain covers environment, quality, climate and biodiversity, safety and security, and housing and the built environment. The place domain looks at our subjective well-being. The people domain looks at our subjective well-being, knowledge, skills, and innovation, and our mental and physical health. And the society domain addresses our community and cultural participation, work and job quality, civic engagement and expression, time use, and income and wealth. Over the time, this resource could help us explore trends, comparisons, and inequalities, and I hope in the future it will provide an opportunity to disaggregate by spatial hierarchies and by demography. If future design is aligned carefully, the place-based dimensions could be very complementary to TILDA, where together we might be able to gain greater insight into how these place-based considerations work for older people at local levels. I think it is important to note that the framework of people, place, and society are not three pillars supporting well-being, but are a cluster of three intensely interwoven and interacting domains. People, place, and society form, inform, and transform each other. In the following exploratory illustration, I'd like to show how we might be able to visualize the complex interrelationships between our individual capabilities, our housing, and our communities and support services. Starting with housing, the axes can represent typologies, or different types of homes and dwellings, our farms, our one-off houses on plots, our urban streets, housing in estates and apartments. And we need to also look and think about other forms of community dwellings and nursing homes. Settlement location is primarily around urban, suburban, town, village, rural, and remote locations. And the characteristics can be a long list, but cover issues like our size, the number of bedrooms, the property age, its material and condition, how it's heated and ventilated, current accessibility and adaptability potential, orientation, and maybe gardens and sheds. As a working model of community, I suggested the following axes: the formal dimensions, the presence of healthcare, education, the Garda, welfare, and local authority services like libraries. retail services, access to shops, banks, post offices, and activity centres and amenities of all kinds, albeit many of these are going online. And I've also included here commerce and enterprise and offices and places to work. And the informal community, availability and participation in leisure and sports, groups, clubs, associations, and special interests. And I've used the WHO classification for functioning for a review of our personal characteristics: body function, our sensory, motor, cognitive, and internal health, our activities and participation around the home and in society, and our environment at home and in workplace. At one level, we could assess our individual and collective well-being as a measure of the operational fit and performance between all these domains and strands. Essentially, how does our home and the community supports at hand fit with our current capabilities now into some future horizon that we can envisage? But I do think our ambitions are greater than better fit. I think our goals are homes that foster our flourishing through either adaptation and new provision. Improvements through age-proofing our communities and housing is suggested as one of the ways forwards. But at a personal and individual level, there cannot be a better researched and more readable place to start than Roseanne's guide to helping us age-proof ourselves. This book highlights 10 strategies for us to pursue in striving for a longer and healthier life. But I think what is fascinating is how the practice of many of these strategies is directly or indirectly interwoven with place and the physical environment, for exercise and walking, gardening, time in nature, being close to water, sleep, relaxation, and the rituals of meals, and with our social environment, friendship, intimacy, and intergenerational links. How we find and reflect on our sense of purpose and meaning in life can nourish our spiritual well-being. And this is also an important area for reconnection with environmental design, as architecture has been struggling to find its own meaning, authenticity, and ethical basis in a highly materialist society. While still at the early implementation stage, the Irish age-friendly programme is quite unique. The original WHO programme was very much conceived as a cities-led programme, connecting city governance and its stakeholders with their older citizens at all socioeconomic levels and with public and private sector providers. By linking it to our county structures supported by a national shared service, the Irish programme is the first to have a truly national reach with a common agenda at the county level framed by the WHO's domain schema. These 8 domains also cluster around place, people, and society, and offer the promise of informing and guiding more responsive, age-friendly planning and housing in the years to come. An important early step for Ireland's age-friendly programme has been the publication of a joint policy statement on housing options for our ageing population between the Department of Environment and the Department of Health. It is focused on 6 interconnected principles comprising ageing in place, supporting urban renewal, promoting sustainable and urban design, using assistive technologies, staying socially connected, and working together. These principles are reinforced to different degrees by an array of initial exemplar projects that have emerged in Ireland over the past 15 years, but we need a step change in implementation, quantity, and coverage. When we set up the Netwell Centre at DKIT in 2006, we did an initial study to get to understand some of the relationships between care and location. In parallel, Eric Dishman at Intel was talking about the shift left, how technology might help shift healthcare from the hospital back to the community and to the home. To characterize the problem we face, from the left, we may have too many older people living in private homes that may not be a good fit, and where their intrinsic health situation is creating pressures to renovate, to adapt, or move. And on the right, too many older people in large nursing homes that are not a good fit with their wishes or aspirations either. There is an assumption that models on the right are too costly and that a shift to the left will be more effective. But other than a small set of exemplar pilots today in Ireland, the space between these two difficult choices is generally void. To a large extent, the goal seems to be framed as the need to provide and build more options and alternatives in a desirable middle ground. What we're starting to see is a change from both directions, as well as the emergence of a new range of housing topologies in this emerging centre ground. So mainstream housing needs to become more accessible and universal and able to accommodate increased community-based services. Nursing homes are appearing to deinstitutionalize, adopting more resident-centered cultures and becoming more home-like. And then in the emerging middle ground. To some extent, this illustration really acts as a sort of index into a range of examples I'd like to share with you, focusing particularly on housing with supports and clustered community housing with care. When I presented to this society 17 years ago, all the visions and examples had been from overseas. While still too few here, it is great to see that housing innovations are now seeding and taking root here in Ireland, and that we have more examples to showcase. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge the great work of Rosalind Malloy and Isolde Dillon at the Housing Agency for their study in pulling together and characterising some 19 Irish projects in their 2018 report, Thinking Ahead, Independent and Supported Housing Models for an Ageing Population. Over the next few slides, I'd like to pick out a few of these exemplars and put them beside some of their reference developments so that we can see some key underpinning patterns. Along with environmental change, new roles such as support coordinators, community navigators, and social prescribers are now forming part of the supported housing makeup. And technology-based services and assistive technology are also playing an important role in home safety and security, home control, information and communication. But I'm going to park these for now, as I think they call for a wider treatment than we have time for today. I was very lucky at the outset of our project in Dundalk to draw on the help of Judy Torrington, who led a wonderful housing and care group at the School of Architecture at Sheffield University. Later, Judy formed part of a high-level group in the UK who produced the first very influential HAPPY report, Housing and Ageing Population Panel Innovation. They widened the net by looking at some 16 exemplars around Europe, and their work resulted in setting out a range of 10 key characteristics for age-friendly home design. And over the past 15 years, the UK practice PRP have brought most, if not all, of these characteristics to life in a wide range of buildings, and they have influenced and supported many other architectural design practices in handling them. With a leaning towards urban locations, many of the projects are specialist forms of apartments, while open to many different types of arrangement and sizes in response to site and orientation. The two key design goals are in relation to natural light and indoor-outdoor relationships. And the key pattern behind these designs are dual aspect, where natural light connects views from two sides, gallery and deck access, where there are no closed corridors with rooms on each side, a mix of 1 bedroom, 1.5 bedroom, and 2 bedroom units, the centrality of the nature and landscaping, and shared and common spaces and services, cafe dining and shared activity spaces. The key observation is that the design around the edge of the units, the zones of movement, transition and rest, are seen to be as important, if not more important, than the specific functional rooms like kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms and bathrooms. Balconies, patios, decks and landscapes draw one outside and connect and join one with nature. A particular feature are winter gardens, enclosable balconies that can be enjoyed all year round and in all weather conditions. With this approach, landscape gardens and trails and pathways are not just what's left over after a building mass has been situated. They are very intentional. Outdoor, indoor, and transitional spaces are carefully arranged to directly promote and support physical movement and light exercise, stimulate sensory experience, and foster positive effect. Nourishment becomes an architectural as well as a dietary concern, where healthy eating provides opportunities for linking some light food production in the garden's landscapes through to enjoying the rituals of preparing, cooking, and sharing the meals indoors. Our panellist, Michael Gowan, led the design team at MCO for the design of the Great Northern Haven in Barrack Street, Dundalk. Opened in 2010, this was the first pilot of this type of age-friendly housing in Ireland, referencing some of the spatial patterns explored earlier. Situated in an old but regenerating neighbourhood about 1 kilometre from the town centre, the scheme is strategically situated adjacent to many amenities, not least the new HSE Primary Care Centre placed within a beautiful stone Victorian railed engineering works. Key features of the building are its scale. It's 16 units built over 3 floors with 2 vertical circulation zones to provide added redundancy in the case of fire. As earlier, it has dual aspect patterns with both straight gallery access to the east and balconies to the west. The units are what are currently described as 1.5 bedroom units, ranging from 65 to 70 meters squared and including an additional visitor WC. The overall ergonomics and detailing of the project were based on the principles of lifetime adaptability, the earlier forerunner and take-up of universal design here in Ireland. And the project followed a strong set of ecological and sustainable design principles at the time, with the early use of green roofs. The Great Northern Haven generated a great deal of interest and went some way to encouraging the Irish government to include a larger age-friendly demonstration project as part of the Rebuilding Ireland strategies for 2016. For the Dundalk project, the supports are very nearby, whereas for the Inchicore project, the supports are integrated on site. This 54-unit scheme is a collaboration between the Department of the Environment and Health and is being implemented by Dublin City Council with support from the HSE. It is being delivered and maintained by Circle Housing Association with resident support provided by a loan. While local authorities and approved housing bodies are now looking to provide more age-friendly housing and apartments for older people on their social housing lists, the supply of options for the private market for existing homeowners who might like to downsize has only recently got attention. At Mount Anvil in Goatstown, Dunleary, a collaboration between the Society of the Sacred Heart, Sophia Housing Association, and Tetrarch Homes are in the pre-planning stages of bringing forward a very innovative, multi-tenured, age-friendly housing scheme centred on the combination of 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. Leaning on the positive Australian experience of another of our panelists, Tom Sheridan, the project promises to be a leading integrated development for older people in the area. A unique feature of the scheme is its siting within the context of 2 beautiful Victorian walled gardens. The upper garden contains a spectacular large intact glasshouse from the 1830s, and the protection and re-energising of these horticultural treasures will provide a wonderful historic and authentic landscape from which to grow the scheme. These renderings show the proposed relationships between the buildings and the landscaping, with a village square drawing the elements together. For Peter Zumthor, the bodily senses, touch, taste, sight, smell, and hearing, should all be fully engaged throughout the process of both making and interacting with architecture. While much analysis has gone on to his church design, he designed a beautiful scheme for older people in Massens Chur in Switzerland. What we see here is a very sensual use of materials: waxed larch flooring, exposed concrete ceilings, truthful limestone walls, and local timber joinery. Needless to say, the Swiss Alps provide a wonderful landscape backdrop. Again, some of the earlier spatial organization patterns are still in play, but the lovely development is to enclose and widen what would have been the deck access. This changes it from a circulation route into a meeting, resting, and public social place. The scheme is close to a nursing home where residents can draw on care services as needed. If earlier examples were looking at the middle ground and developing it from the direction of independent dwellings, the next few are coming from the opposite direction, the deinstitutionalizing of traditional long-term residential nursing homes. 2 areas of transformation are provided and involved. Physically, to make places smaller, more intimate, and more homely, more like home. And socially, to transform the model of care, its conception, ethos, and orientation, so that it is more person-centered and, if possible, person-directed. I had the great fortune to work with Anne Coyle, Brendan McCormick, and Lucia Carraher on a culture change resource for the HSE called Places to Flourish, which took a situational and pattern-based approach to how care teams could examine and reflect on their practice and adapt its orientation towards residents' flourishing. In terms of physical expression, approaches such as the Greenhouse Initiative in the States, the Hogway Village in Holland, the Household Movement, and Shylock here in Ireland have all looked to transform and rehumanize settings that need more support. At the physical level, the general spatial pattern is of a smaller number of studio living apartments, 5 or 6, and certainly no more than 10, clustered around a shared country kitchen with areas for shared dining and sitting. And such spaces will have nooks and crannies so that individuals can find smaller, more intimate areas to rest, read, relax, and chat. An important spatial ambiguity is its tolerance of alternative use patterns, where some residents may see the living unit as their home and the community areas as their local neighbourhood, whereas others may attach to the community space as their home, where the living units are more of their private quarters. These small-scale units are seen to be particularly supportive for people with dementia. My first experience of this type of housing approach was in Rosandersgård in Haninge, not far from Stockholm in Sweden. This is a housing scheme for people with dementia and is organised as 4 households, each with 10 studio apartments around a common kitchen and dining area. These winter photographs in the snow mask the sitting area unfolding out to a lovely outdoor area nestled within an expansive rose garden. The studio living units are around 35 to 40 metres squared, and they are entered through an internal vestibule offering an additional level of privacy and orientation space. They are sufficiently large to allow beds and furniture to be arranged in many different ways. In response to the growing prevalence of dementia in their home care catchment area, and inspired by the possibilities of small-scale development they saw in places like Hogvey in Holland, Carebright set about developing the first dementia village in Bruff, County Limerick. It is organised in 3 self-managing bungalows, each with 6 studio living units in each of them. Each bungalow has a shared community kitchen, dining area and living area, and there are a range of semi-private sitting areas with views to the enclosed gardens and patio areas. Like Rosandersgård example, the studio living unit has both a sleeping and private sitting area, and a vestibule provides a transitional space between the private units and the circulation gallery. There is a vibrant community hub, and the cafe is now a very busy location for people to come to from all over Bruff. It is regulated by HICWA, and residents are funded through the Fair Deal, and a large part of its success is that residents are carefully screened to ensure that they have the capacity to successfully adapt to moving into these types of surroundings. The Daughters of Charity scheme in Consilla is another lovely example of this type of clustered living approach. We now have enough good practice exemplars here in Ireland to encourage us to raise our ambitions, and through shared visioning to imagine, I think even to expect, an environment for better homes and neighbourhoods in the future. There is room to improve, but how to put it all together? Across these examples, there are a range of underpinning mechanisms or building blocks, essentially design guides, techniques, and motivators from which we can unfold our responses. It's worth starting with those 10 characteristics that the Happy team reported upon and which animated earlier examples, as they are still very influential today. While most are applicable to dwelling types, their audience is primarily the providers of apartments in urban centres. They are about adequate space and flexibility, daylight in the home and in shared spaces, good aspect, outdoor spaces and balconies and winter gardens, adaptability and care-ready design, positive use of circulation space, shared facilities and hubs, plants, trees, and the natural environment, energy efficiency and sustainable design, plenty of storage for belongings and bicycles, and external shared surfaces and home zones to handle transition spaces. Some of these are addressed through a range of the design themes I'd like to explore now. For me, universal design is a design for social justice movement, and when at the drawing board, it's a state of inclusive consciousness. At its core, it's about accessibility, understanding, and usability to be applied everywhere with the qualifier to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. In 2012, Steinfeld and Maisel extended this lexicon by adding a set of 8 goals, declaring universal to be a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. While rooted in accessibility and ergonomics, this goal orientation towards performance, health and wellness, and participation really does bring it into the heart of inclusive design decision-making. Universal design sits beside a range of more specialist and discipline-specific design guides prepared by occupational therapists, disability services, the Irish Wheelchair Association, and for groups tackling sensory loss. These all help to raise awareness and give guidance to remove barriers, though I do think some level of harmonization or a meta guide is needed to help non-specialists to work with and across them all. But more than regulation, universal design, I think, is a mindset. 40 years ago, Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Laurent House in Rockford, Illinois, to provide a dwelling for a 29-year-old war veteran who was paralyzed from the waist down. As you see, the home is about movement, materials, and light to liberate accessibility, clarity, and usability. For all of us, a key challenge with standards and regulations is that they tend to define minimums, and very quickly, these minima can become maximums. In his 1984 book, Biophilia, the biologist Edward Wilson defined biophilia as the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. And he proposed the possibility that there are deep affiliations humans have with other forms in nature as a whole, and that these are deeply rooted in our biology. Biophilic design is beginning to emerge as a new practice, widening the goals and intentionality of architecture and landscape design to foster more impactful outcomes on our health and well-being. The building blocks of biophilic design are nature, plants, water, wind and air, light and space, natural materials and natural patterns, and how these play on our senses as we move through space, outdoors and indoors. While evidence continues to emerge about the impact of designed nature on our health and well-being, it's a practice that's been with us for many hundreds of years. The Katsura Palace in Tokyo is an early 17th century example where sliding screens can hide and reveal nature and regulate light and airflow. And it's not always about plant and greenery. Natural materials, overhead daylighting, and water of the bath and shower can combine to form a simple biophilic bathroom. At its heart, I think sustainable design is about humanity shifting from our drive to control and exploit nature to us learning to live with and respect nature. In our homes, sustainable design strategies are driving our approach to waste and recycling, harvesting rainwater and reduction of fossil fuel use, reducing our carbon footprint through home energy efficiency, and as our cars transition to e-vehicles. But what about improving the sustainability of our urban footprint? The 15-minute city is an urban framework aimed at improving access and sustainability by spatially orienting and developing communities to live within 15-minute radius of essential urban services, typically on foot or by bike. There are 4 key characteristics to the idea: proximity, housing and essential needs that must be close; diversity, land use must be mixed to provide a variety of urban amenities in close proximity; density, there must be enough place to support a diversity of businesses in a compact land area; and ubiquity, in order for this to be equitable framework, these neighborhoods need to be inclusive, they need to be available and affordable to everyone. But they're a very positive spatial arrangement for older people living closer together and with easy access to services and amenities. Vitruvius's 3 principles of architecture, Firmitas, Utilitas, and Venustas, maybe today it's buildability, functionality, and delight, have animated architecture for over 2 millennia. But we've been struggling to talk about delight and desire for some time. Neuroscience may help bring delight back into the Trinity. Embodiment is the idea that our minds, our bodies, and the environment we live in are intimately interwoven, and an enactive approach to architectural experience goes some way to describing, through the concepts of embodiment and affordances, how we as bodies, sensing, moving, feeling, and thinking beings, relate to, interact with, and experience architecture. These affordances address image patterns of recurring structures in our experiences and dwellings, such as our containment and enclosure, verticality and uprightness, our balance, and motion and movement. Some of these image patterns are most beautifully discussed in Gaston Bachelard's book, The Poetics of Space, where he explores how early childhood experiences at home, our daydreaming and imaginings, and our image of the hut animate our desires for protection and adventure. Cellars, garrets, drawers, chests, wardrobes, corners, and the dialectics of inside and outside are all called from our memories to become active images, shaping how we understand and engage space. Enactive cognitive science has identified the importance of emotions in relation to pretension. That is around anticipating our next moment, where pretension is manifested as unfulfilled desire in the living present and motivated by the environment. As Perez Gomez says, a lived world without effective valence, one merely comfortable, mute, neutral, and sedated, would significantly curtail a sense of purpose in our human action. The role of architecture is not just problem solving, but more properly to reveal the space for desire, for venustas. I think neuroscience is opening up a whole new way of understanding how architecture can shape and set the mood for human experience, whilst providing a stronger holistic biological basis for design. The promise is huge. The fourth zone of activity is around agency. How do we pull this all together to make tangible change on the ground and impact positively on the lives of older people? It's about resources and markets, investing and getting built and getting benefit, and about value creation. If we need to pay more for better age-friendly homes and environments and the services supporting them, do we adequately value what we get in return? The Older and Wiser guide from the UK Housing Forum lays out a 5-step process to bring forward housing for older people. And it looks at people, what are our needs and aspirations for people in the area? Homes, what's there already that can be built upon, making the most of existing building stock? Money, is the scheme considered viable? Design, getting the right brief. And delivery, turning the concept into reality. The issues are very interconnected, but I'd like to pick out one or two. Planning class will point to different treatments. In the UK, it's classed as C2 or C3. But here, if we're coming from housing direction or from a clustered living with care direction, housing with supports sits in the middle, and it's currently posing an interesting challenge to planning classifications and zoning in the UK and here in Ireland. Whether it's a renovation, a new house, a new building dwelling scheme, or a neighbourhood master plan, developing the right brief is essential. And while architecture is more than problem solving, we do need to seek out and have a shared understanding of design problem with the designers and the clients and designers are facing together. The briefing process illustrated here is a hybrid of the work of Will and Pina on problem seeking and an approach I gleaned from John Craig of Alderton and Craig when I was an architecture student. It's a journey of inquiry, exploration, empathy, and judgment, organizing needs and shaping how they are agreed and presented to designers. While initial lines of thought explore function, form, economy, and time, that's sort of the who, the where, the what, and the when of a project. It's the vertical probing, the goals and the concepts, the why and the how that are more difficult, but more interesting. Many of the concepts listed here will get explored during a briefing process, but 4 which I think are very influential are a client's attitude towards flexibility and tolerance, and security and risk, as the influence, adaptability and responsiveness, and also the culture and ethos of a scheme. If we look again at our housing development pathways, the 2 paths currently have different capital and revenue care funding streams. From the housing direction, if publicly funded, capital is approved by the Department of the Environment and channeled through local authorities or approved housing bodies, and home support and care packages are sourced through the HSE. From the nursing home care direction, capital will be either private or from the Department of Health HSE, and the cost of accommodation and care is based on the fair deal. But what of the emerging mixing it up middle? This is a hotly debated and contested area where the levels of both capital and care costs are still uncertain and variable. Options might include enhancing the home care package programme, loosening the fair deal, finding some flexible combination or pooling between housing and health, introducing a new insurance category like PACE, which they have in the US, or maybe some type of social impact financing where operation is financed on a pay-by-results basis. The difficulty here is measuring and valuing the impacts if we don't have good data and good evaluation frameworks. I think at the heart of age-friendly housing is social value, but we need to look at social value in the round across the totality of living in sustainable and inclusive communities. It's not easy, but something like the application of TOMs around themes, outcomes, measures, which is being used in the UK, might help us get a handle on covering and measuring a wide variety of social incomes or social outcomes in areas such as jobs, growth, community, environment, and innovation, along with the direct quality of life outcomes on older people. Measuring good, the social value of the contribution of inclusive and age-friendly neighbourhoods with age-friendly housing supports and care, and measuring it towards a community's vitality, I think would be a very inclusive way forward. Maybe not so much 3 wishes, but 3 areas where I think attention would be really worthwhile, and where if progress is made, we might be better able to more effectively improve older people's lives, homes, and communities on all fronts. I apologize this in advance, but I'm a sucker for alliteration. So I'm going to finish by highlighting well-being, wells, and walllessness. We've seen today how architecture and design is becoming more well-being centric, fostering our attachment to inclusive and joyous places and spaces through universal design, engaging with multisensory body and mind, enjoying movement inside and outside and between, providing shelter, comfort, and security that's resonant with our human dignity, and bringing us closer in social proximity with neighborhood and community. Many of these other essential schemes and themes on our wellness canvas are directly or indirectly connected or influenced by getting our placemaking right. Community participation, work availability and quality, civic and cultural engagement, and how we use our time. I think it would be wonderful if we could better align our interrelated and layered models of well-being from our own personal well-being plans up through local community plans, regional strategies, and national well-being frameworks. Alignment and mappings might help us better understand if and how bottom-up and top-down actions and at all levels in between are making a difference, and where our gaps can get unified and harmonized attention. For wells, here I'm referring to the wellspring of resources we need to draw upon to deliver better housing options for older people. I've used Michelle Nongorai's beautiful Indigenous artwork, My Grandmother's Country, as a foundation layer here. Much Aboriginal art is a complex overlay of our territorial map of natural resources, water holes, plants, and earth formations, of experiences of events, journeys, ceremonies, and stories etched in the landscape, and of its spiritual life force connected to and embedded in the dreaming philosophy. Here in Ireland, if we're to design for older people sustainably, ecologically, inclusively, resource effectively, and with sensitivity to our communities, both settled and nomadic, our starting point should be the land, the place, and the community context. Money matters, but the Older and Wiser guide prompts us to look at the other resources and energies we need to draw on also. The best housing is of its site and of its context, attuned with local needs and aspirations. Exploring these is time well spent. Finally, walllessness. The character of the architecture we've looked at today has been emphasizing light and openness to nature, fostering inside-outside flow, whilst providing an interior that glows of protection and warmth. It's about dissolving walls without losing a sense of enclosure and interiority. But the wellnessness or the walllessness I'm alluding to here is of the social, cultural, and organizational kind. Nelson Mandela's quote says, "A society that does not value its older people denies its roots and endangers its future. Let us strive to enhance their capacity to support themselves for as long as possible, but when they cannot do so anymore, to care for them." Behind Nelson Mandela's quote, there is still a sense of us and they. Whatever about diluting the us and them through participatory and co-design processes, the problem is that when it comes to house and neighbourhood planning, design and delivery, and the operation of harmonised environments and community health services, there is a lot of separate us's involved. The siloing walls within and around our public healthcare system and within and around our environment and housing systems are both high and strong. Collaborative working across organizational edges is very difficult, even more so if there are power imbalances between state and vital civic society and community groups. If seamless collaboration is beyond us, we need to fight to take down these walls and to transgress positively so that we can learn from each other and channel our efforts, energies, and resources in ways that don't create too much emotional heartache. I think together we can rise to the challenge that Nelson Mandela sets out. Whilst we can take nothing for granted, and sometimes progress can be reversible, I do feel that we are slowly but solidly drawing together many of the right elements upon which to shape a more age-friendly society. Age-friendly our homes and communities will be a long but worthwhile endeavour. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. We have a few questions in, but before I come to the questions, I'm going to come to the panel first of all. And I'm going to ask Fiona Newell to open the panel discussions with her reflections. And just to repeat, with respect to Fiona, she's Professor of Experimental Psychology at Trinity. Her particular interest is in human perception and sensory systems and how the senses interact with one another to form a unified perception of the world. So therefore, she's very well placed to inform further the neuroscience component of your discussion. And actually that thread ran right through it, didn't it? So maybe Fiona, you would respond please to Rod's text.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Roseanne. And thank you very much, Rod. That was enlightening talk. Very interesting to hear about all the developments within Ireland, as well as your overview of the principles, the architectural principles that are important to keep in mind, as well as how age-friendly environments can be constructed. I think this is really important. Now, you alluded to the role of neuroscience in this, and I completely agree with you that I think that neuroscientists could learn a lot more from architects. Architects as a body have, long known what are the principles that support well-being and that foster joy, if you like, or those emotions, those moods that you talked about. And it's the neuroscientist's job then is to really try to identify what is it that is specific about that architecture or about that environment that supports those types of that supports brain health and brain function and well-being. And that's some of the things that I'm interested in, but particularly from the point of view of multi-sensory environments. So what is it about our natural environment or the built environment that supports brain health and function? And what are those sensory specific aspects that support brain health and brain function? Now, over the last 2 decades, many of us, I'm sure a lot of people that are listening right now will be very familiar with the research in neuroscience that shows that familiarity with a particular environment or navigating through environment actually has a direct effect on brain structure. So you will have heard of the London taxi drivers study that show that taxi drivers that have learned what's called the knowledge, have a larger part of their brain, which is referred to as the hippocampus, that's larger in that group than it would be in, for example, London bus drivers that don't have to learn explicitly the shortest route between A and B in London. And that's been shown over and over again, that your ability to navigate your familiarity with an environment actually supports brain structure. And we have, in my group, in my lab, and this is research that we've been doing for many years, some of it actually in collaboration with Roseanne and her team in the Tilda project. We've looked at the role of environment on cognition. And we have found evidence that is very much linked in with that London taxi driver study. The role of enriched environments, for example, can support brain function and brain health. That's very easy to demonstrate in an animal model, but it's less clear how it plays out in the human brain. But we've looked at this from the point of view of if you have, for example, a familiar environment, and we've conducted studies with older adults and compared performance with younger adults as well. And we found, for example, in one of our studies, if we ask people to remember the location of novel objects that are embedded in a familiar environment, and in that experiment, we used the campus of Trinity College as a familiar environment. We asked people to remember those novel objects, and we asked them to remember the direction that they took when they encountered those novel objects. And we embedded them in different locations within Trinity. And what we found was that compared to the same experiment in an unfamiliar environment, older adults' memory for objects, for the directions that they took, was enhanced when the experiment was done in a familiar environment than when it was done in an unfamiliar environment. Now, that, I think, addresses your comment earlier about the idea of having a home. What is a home? What does that mean to somebody? It's more than the architecture, isn't it? It's to do with, what's familiar to you. What are your routines? What is your social world? And you very nicely, talked about that sense of home and social community and how architecture can support those types of bonds that you will get by just in the way that you structure the different homes within, or the different houses and the different living quarters within an environment. And our research suggests that that just really does enhance brain function. We've also found that, the nature of the environment itself can affect capacity. You talked, Rod, about capacity as well, and how the environment should be, that it should complement the person's capacity. But the environment can also enhance capacity. So, for example, in another study that Roseanne and I have published recently with Annalisa Setti from the University of Cork, we have found that if you grow up if your early childhood was in an urban setting, then as you get older, your brain is better able to tolerate those rapid sounds and sights and all of that multi-sensory stimulation that can be overwhelming to many of us at any one time. But if you grew up before the age of 14 in an urban environment, your brain is better able to handle that multi-sensory cacophony as you get older, compared to somebody who grew up in a rural environment. So your environment, your surroundings, be it built, be it social, can really have an influence on the architecture of your brain in many ways. And I think this is really important as well. But we have a very poor understanding of how that plays out. And that's one of the jobs that, somebody like me as a neuroscientist, we're trying to unravel what are the actual critical features of an environment, be it social, be it familiar, be it built. What are those critical features that really get to the heart of supporting brain function and brain health as we get older? And that's what we're trying to do.
Before we leave you, and they're great comments, thank you, Fiona, to contextualize Rod's talk. But before we leave it, there was one thing I'm going to take issue with, if I could, and you've actually mentioned it, Fiona, and I don't think you did, Rod, is the importance of social environment, what we mean by that, and in the context of intergenerational interactions. And at no stage, I think, in your lists of requirements for age-friendly environment did we see intergenerational circulation. And yet we know from research, well, you can speak better to this, Fiona, that fluidity is very important for variety, for engagement, and enriches all age cohorts, not just older persons. So maybe, I don't know, Fiona, you might like to contextualize that, or Rod to respond.
I think that's absolutely true. Your social network, it's been shown by several studies, the richer your social network, the better it is for your brain function and brain health. However, the job of scientists like me is to find out what are the key characteristics of having a rich social network that support that. Is it the fact that, you know, you're going to different people's houses all the time? That's the navigational network. Or is it the number of different faces that you have to keep in memory, or the number of people that you have to identify in your social network? Is that also part of it? Or is it the richness of narratives that come with different age groups? What exactly is it? This isn't clear. So it's not enough from a scientific point of view to say your social network has to be rich. We have to really try and unpack that and see, what is it about it? Because it involves so many different modules in the brain, face perception to navigation, etc. Is there one thing that really does all the job, all the heavy lifting for that? Or is it a mixture of different things? That's what we need to find out as
Rod?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's an oversight. It may have been in compacting the presentation, but absolutely the intergenerational piece. I mean, it's an essential part of it, and I think we, when we're looking at where our housing is located, and that there, we're not going behind hedges, in terms of where housing for older people is, that we're in active communities, and that there is we're close to schools. We're hearing the noises of children. They're on the streets. We're in these 15-minute cities where everybody is intermixing. I think that's the kind of kind of multi-textured environments that we're thinking of. So I think if I didn't highlight it, that's an omission. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to Ida now. Ida, I've already introduced you, Ida. Maybe you'd like to just comment, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rod. That was an exceptionally insightful presentation. So many parallels, I suppose, from an occupational therapy background that I can draw from. And I think, so many frameworks that you referenced that we can certainly use to guide our thinking and our practice. And, touching on what Fiona said when we're looking at, intrinsic capacity and how an environment can enable or constrain, I suppose, somebody's occupational performance. And that's always what I'm looking at from an occupational therapy perspective is, like you said, the WHO, like ICF classification, how is somebody's body structures, impairments, constraining or enabling their participation, in everyday life? And as an occupational therapist, what key, I suppose, adaptations, because often when we're looking at environmental design, it is looking at making adaptations to existing, I suppose, private dwellings. So perhaps your scope or capacity can be a little bit more limited. And I suppose we have a number of frameworks or blueprints that we'd use as a reference. And you heavily referenced, the universal design approach. And, certainly the dementia-friendly hospitals using a universal design approach is one that I think traverses all environments. And then other kind of blueprints like the National Centre for Excellence in Universal Design as part of the National Disability Authority and all of that. And I suppose it's looking at the personal factors as well, and taking all of that into account when you're making recommendations to to somebody's home, which is so personal to them. And it's trying to, I suppose, maximize engagement in place. And you said, you know, about flourishing in place, positive aging, and invariably, you know, a person's home is where they want to be. So it's just about being creative with regards to how we can maximize their engagement in that environment and across all environments.
Thanks a million, Ija, very much. I think that this reflects what Rod was emphasizing nicely from a hospital perspective. And I have 2 questions from the public, and I'm going to address one to Michael and one to Tom. And the first one, maybe I think to Tom Sheridan from Tetrarch Homes, and it's that DEC. This comes from Matthew Gibb, who's a specialist in dementia education and training. DEC access housing had become synonymous with failed public housing. There is a new trend in architecture back towards DEC access. What will prevent it from failing again?
Look, I guess that question is probably dating back to the 50s and the 60s when you had your council housing in Dublin City. All I can say is that DEC access, from a design point of view, is inherently more sociable for the tenant. And I guess the senior schemes that we're developing will certainly be a hell of a lot more managed and maintained than historically the apartments that I think this question is referring back to. And look, I'm going to go and just say that a lot of the social housing historically in Ireland was actually high quality housing. It was just very poorly managed, and it sort of went down a very slippery slope in terms of antisocial behaviour. I guess what you're dealing with in senior living housing is you're dealing with a sector of society predominantly over 65s, where the social behavioural trends are tamed, should we say, from your typical DEC access sort of type developments. But I mean, you're dealing with a different cohort in terms of the people living in the apartments, which makes a massive difference. Plus, the apartments are managed. There's on-site supports, and I mean, Rod did a very good presentation. The amenities, both in terms of internal facilities and the external environment, in terms of landscaping, are very much more enhanced than you would have seen in the apartment typologies that I think that question is referring to.
That's very good. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Tom, from the, I mean, I'm interested, are you finding much more demand on age-friendly environments?
Look, I mean, I'm not a designer, I'm not a care provider. I come from a development and construction background, albeit that I did spend 10 years in Australia delivering these type of facilities.
I think we're kind of losing your, we're losing you a bit there, Tom.
I can tell you what I'm finding in the Irish market. It's very frustrating because what I'm finding in the Irish market is that senior housing is not actually recognised. There's no housing subclass for housing for the over 65s, and it leads to a lot of confusion with planning departments when you're actually trying to deliver these schemes. We're having to tiptoe through current planning legislation to try and deliver the schemes that we currently have. The scheme that we have in Mount Marion in the grounds of Mount Anvil School, I believe, will be one of the finest schemes of its type in Europe. However, even that scheme, we're having to sort of tiptoe around current legislation. And unfortunately, that leaves us open tremendously to objection. And look, I guess somewhat that's to be expected when you're the first private developer trying to deliver these type of developments. Because if you look historically, it's been typically AHBs or councils. But look, I think it's very well proven internationally that once these type of developments are established and appreciated, that they're actually generally the fastest growing psychology in the likes of New Zealand and Australia.
That's a very good point. Your connection's slightly intermittent, Tom. So on that point, and with respect to the issues you raised there, that's okay. I might go to Michael though, because it's a good. I think it's a good note, Michael, to bring you in with respect to your sustainability and urban design hat on, and maybe respond to what Tom has just commented on, and then anything further you've got to say with respect to Rod, and then I have a specific question for you from the audience.
Okay, I suppose maybe to go through them specifically on the issue of deck access homes. I think Tom has it right. It's not really the fault of the building. The building is just bricks and mortar. These are social issues, compounded by segregating different parts of society, saying these people go here, these people go there, and I think along with the allusion that's been made to intergenerational living, mixed tenure is hugely important in creating healthy societies where you have private housing, social housing, affordable housing, age-friendly housing, assisted living, all these various tenure types, that they coexist within the community, not that they're segregated and parsed out from each other. So they're two very important things. Interestingly,
have you proportions? Can you give us percentages with respect to each of those different elements that constitute an ideal mix?
No, because I don't think anyone's quite cracked that formula yet. But connectivity, I suppose, forms a large part of it as well, in terms of how developments relate to each other, and moving away from, previously in both social and private settings, ideas of kind of gated and walled communities, which kind of reinforces that idea of segregation. Mix is hard to determine. You can determine it within the area of your own site, but when you're thinking kind of neighborhood-wide, city-wide, it becomes a little more difficult to define. But interestingly, the point that Tom touched on there around a specific class type for age-friendly housing, one does exist, but only for social housing, and it is an interesting anomaly, where there is kind of a certain flexibility afforded to developments providing age-friendly housing in a social context, but not in a private context. So it is a fairly glaring anomaly there, particularly in where we find ourselves now, where increasingly, the private sector will be called upon to play a role in addressing this growing issue in Ireland. Something I suppose, Rod, I think we may have spoken about in the past. The idea of people who are living maybe in communities. I know Dublin particularly, where in the older suburbs you may have people whose children have moved away. They're living in large houses. They want to downsize, but the opportunity isn't there for them to downsize. They might be asset rich, cash poor, and the opportunity to actually stay within their communities. They might necessarily qualify for social housing. So the private market, I suppose, and creating the conditions in which the private market can provide opportunities for those people as well, I think is very important. And again, it's part of that more granular mix that we need in terms of our approach to housing. Just on Rod's presentation, yeah, I think it goes back to 2008 when myself and Rod were working on Great Northern Haven together, and I've been quite lucky in that this is probably the second time in the past 6 or 8 months, Rod, that we've met. There is the interest, I suppose, that was sparked with me by Rod working on that project has stayed with me through my own architectural practice, and I brought it with me to the Land Development Agency, and I was really happy to see that many of my colleagues actually have a really big interest in this area as well, to the extent that we organised a seminar with Alone in November last year, looking specifically at housing for older people, and Alone had invited Rod along as a keynote speaker to that, and he also made a great impression, because afterwards, I suppose the conversations we'd been having around universal design, age-friendly housing within LDA developments, are kind of accelerated and formalized to a degree. So we've been, I suppose, at two levels. At the community level, we have an opportunity in that there's about 250 hectares of land in the government's housing policy, Housing for All, identified for transfer to the Land Development Agency. About 80% of that is brownfield sites in urban locations, and this is really important. It goes to the issues that Rod is speaking about. They're sites which are close to, transport links, schools, healthcare, shops, restaurants, post offices. They are well located, but often not well connected. They tend to be kind of have existing or pre-existing uses as industrial or institutional areas, so they have walls around them. So in terms of that first big move in creating master plans and spatial frameworks for these areas, we have a very strong emphasis on opening up the sites, creating permeability, not just to let residents in and out, but to allow the wider communities on the periphery to connect with each other through the site. Doing community and social audits to ensure that we're not replicating in the site what already exists outside it, to ensure that people come into the site to avail of some services, whereas people within the site have to go outside to avail of other services. And then you start to get this mix and this dynamic, and this is all aligned with the the national planning framework and the compact the compact growth.
So I'm going to stop you there.
Agenda.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much. That's a really comprehensive response. I have one question I want you to address very quickly, and then we'll wrap. And that's from Aaron. Homes often built on the outskirts of towns and villages where the people living in them do not have access to the local community. You've kind of touched on that, services and resources. Out of sight, is it out of sight, out of mind?
Sorry, Rose, I just missed the first part.
Why are nursing homes built on the outskirts of towns and villages? Is it out of sight, out of mind?
Why are they built on the outskirts? I don't know is the honest answer. I've been involved in a number of in private practice. I've been involved in a number of developments. Development plans tend to.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom, go.
It's too expensive to deliver a brownfield site in a village or an urban location. Is the bottom line.
Okay.
And that's what it comes down to. The margins in nursing homes are so narrow that to build in a brownfield site, I mean, my experience here, talking 40 to 50% of an additional capital cost. So that's why nursing homes are normally built in greenfield sites on the peripheries.
Right. Well, it's a very sad note to leave on, I think. We've already had an engaging public lecture last year, led by Rudy Westendorf in Copenhagen, on aging in place, and identifying how they had such a small proportion compared to Ireland of people requiring so-called nursing homes. And even the nursing homes were very much the structure Rod described, a house with 4 or 5 apartments and a central nursing pod. So let's hope that somebody wakes up to the need for really rethinking what we call nursing homes. and linking together in practical terms what's happening in the Department of Health and delivery of social and healthcare in the community, and what's happening in the built environment that we've heard so eloquently rehearsed today. I want to thank you very much, Rod, for an informed lecture. I want to thank all of our panel. We've covered this fascinating and very important topic in some detail, but we have to revisit it because I think we've left so many questions that need to be further answered. And I want to thank all of our participants for your engagement today. And with that, we'll say au revoir. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.